But a friend of mine who is a farmer said to me he got his best ideas when he was sitting on a tractor, not sitting at his desk. And it's because he wasn't doing, say, heavy thinking, but he's in the back of his mind, maybe it's there. And then you get that big idea and that chance to sort of decompress.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of Fireside Chats with Erin. I'm your host, Erin. As Executive Director of the Grain Growers of Canada, I started this podcast to serve as a forum for real conversations with industry influencers and policymakers. Today, I have the opportunity to sit down with a leader in our sector, someone with whom I have a number of shared interests. Trevor Heck is the president of Syngenta Canada, and today we're going to talk about the value of diversity and inclusion, what it's like to lead during times of great uncertainty, and how the pandemic is likely to shape the way we work now and into the future. Trevor grew up surrounded by agriculture, next to his parents' family farms in the Neutral Hills of Alberta. Helping out his father in the ag retail and grain merchandising industry, Trevor gained an early appreciation for entrepreneurship, hard work, and the important contribution that farmers make to our lifestyle and communities. Trevor began his career with Syngenta in 1992, working in sales with growers and retailers out of Provost, Alberta. From there, he assumed various commercial roles in North America as well as Europe. And from 2011 to 2018, he served as the head of marketing in Canada. Trevor holds a Bachelor's of Commerce with the University of Alberta and a graduate certificate in executive coaching from Royal Roads University in Victoria, my alma mater. As a certified executive coach himself, he is also a strong advocate of leader development and support in agriculture. This passion has borne several business management courses, including Syngenta Grower University Business Foundations, that are helping growers improve their operations in the face of evolving markets. Trevor is also a director on the executive committee of CropLife Canada and has served on the board of directors of Cereals Canada. Thank you, Trevor, for stopping by for a fireside chat.
Oh, thanks, Erin. Thanks for the opportunity. And this has been one of the most exciting things I've gotten to do over the last week. So I'm pretty pumped about it.
That says a lot about the situation in which we find ourselves these days. But yeah. I too have really been looking forward to talking with you. And I want to start, prior to joining Grain Growers of Canada, I worked at Syngenta and I was based in the Calgary office where you were at the time. Your office was right across the hall from my office, and we were both situated right next door to the coffee station. And I mention this because I had the good fortune of sampling some fantastic coffees that you would bring into the office with very clear instructions on how they ought to be prepared. And as I got to know more about you and talk to folks about you, they had indicated that coffee was more than just a drink for you. This was it was a hobby, it was a passion. And so I thought one way of opening today's conversations would be to tell our listeners a bit about how this has become more than just a drink for you. And if in so doing, you could also share some tips with us on how to brew the perfect cup.
Sure. Yeah, it is more than just a drink, I guess. But it started a long time ago, and I couldn't tell you exactly when it started. But really, how I got really closely connected to coffee is I'm a foodie by nature. So I really like cooking. If you've seen the LinkedIn bread video, I'm really into baking. But coffee actually was more of a connection back to being a foodie. And what I like to do is I like to taste everything that I'm, whether it's come to nutrition, but I'm really focused on how things taste. And we're lucky because in Calgary, we have some of the best coffee roasters in the world are based here in Calgary. And so, being based here, a big part of my career, not my entire career, I started to sample some really high quality coffees. And what I really started to get excited about was that a lot of these coffees were from individual producers, individual farmers, in different coffee producing countries around the world. And I started to really get interested in that sort of food connection back to a farmer and in agriculture. And often it's like an individual farmer, or there is, multiple farmers kind of in a local area that are producing this coffee. And, there's just wildly different flavors. And it really got me excited. Not unlike, I guess, the wine industry, is that you can get these, there are different elevations, different varieties, different soil, different year, and they still taste different from year to year. And so I didn't just kind of go into the rabbit hole a bit, and I didn't go all the way into the rabbit hole, but I went pretty far into it from, getting into coffee roasting, entered some coffee competitions in North America. I started doing coffee appreciation classes, free classes for people at cafes. And, for me, I get pretty excited about the next day. I'm always thinking, hey, what am I going to have for my coffee tomorrow? And so that part is why I really like coffee, and my whole family's kind of into coffee in that kind of way. If I was to give some quick coffee brewing tips, if you look at filter coffees, there's actually, it's not the coffee maker. And sometimes people are always thinking, they're always talking about their coffee maker. Well, my coffee maker is like a $10 filter coffee maker. I've got one here, and it's, you can get it cheap, $10. It's got a paper filter in it. That's all you need for a coffee maker. But the key ingredients to a good coffee are, you have to buy good coffee, appreciate, you can't have bad coffee and make good coffee out of it. You have to start with good coffee. The other thing is that you need a good grinder. And I've got, you don't have to spend a lot of money, but I've got a grinder here. It's a hand grinder, but it's a burr grinder. It's kind of like almost like the grinders that you have for grinding up pepper, for example, but they make a really good particle size, like a consistent particle size, so your extraction's good. The last thing is you need good water. Coffee's 95% water. And if you have bad water, or you have coffee or water that doesn't make good coffee, no matter what you do, it's not going to live up to your expectations. So I take that stuff all over Canada. I make coffees all over the place. I would say Ottawa has good coffee water. So I've made some good coffees in Ottawa. I've made great coffees here where I live in Cochrane, Alberta, because the Bow River flows right by here. We've got really good water. But there's places where coffee tastes really bad because the water is just not good for making coffee. So those are my tips for coffee. But it's back to, this whole thing's around food, agriculture, my connection back to farming. That's kind of how I got there.
Okay, good coffee. So we're well situated in Ottawa for good water to brew coffee. And I take it then in the Heck household, there isn't a house blend. It sounds like you're always trying new and exciting
We
coffee.
probably have right now 15 coffees, maybe right now. And
depending on the mood.
yeah, and we do have, so we've been at Origin before, and there's certain producers in Costa Rica that we really like. For example, when that coffee comes out, we usually buy enough and hold it in our freezer to last us a year, because we know it's not going to be back for another year. So that's kind of, we identify those coffees that we know are going to be available. And it's kind of like wine, you buy that vintage and you're not going to see it again for another year. So, and it'll taste different next year.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. And cheers. I'm sure this is by no means does this compare to what you have, but maybe next time we see each other and we have this conversation, it will be your coffee that we're enjoying together. So let's move on. I've got a few questions for you that I want to dig into. You may know that along with a friend and colleague of mine, Hannah Conchu, I host another podcast which focuses on the importance of diversity in Canada's agriculture sector. And I must admit that I do think a lot about diversity, but when I do, it tends to relate to gender, race, ethnicity. I seldom think about the different perspectives that age can bring to the conversation. How do you think that the generational shift that we're currently experiencing in the ag sector is influencing board structure and recruitment? And in your view, do we overlook the benefits of having a skill matrix that includes age?
Okay. That's a good question. I'm kind of wondering, though, if you asked me that because I've got gray hair. I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to answer it regardless, this is a really good question, and it makes me think about something that came up recently. We were kind of doing a 1 year review or discussion, reminiscing at our COVID-19 task team, and about what happened over the last year, and why I got thinking about age in that, or sort of generations, was that I think one of the recipes to success around our COVID-19 task team was that we had a broad range of generations and personal situations covered off within the people around the team. We had everybody from single early career type of people to individuals with young children at home, to high school aged kind of families, to so parents, grandparents, empty nesters, and the age group pretty much was from 20s to close to 60. And I think what that allowed us to do was not having to guess in terms of some of the perspectives and some of the situations that people were going through. We were getting a really broad input from a lot of different people, and everybody's input was valued regardless of their age and situation, because it represented our employee population for the most part. Not exactly, but I look back on that and I look at that as being, I've always wanted to have a team that had that sort of broad age diversity, and gender diversity. And I was reflecting on it. It was one of the secrets to success. And recently, I was on it was a webinar, and John DePutter, who's pretty famous in Canada as a grain marketing, watches the markets, and it's been around for quite a while. I was on that merchandising call with a marketing call webinar, and there was people like all different types of age of farmers on that webinar as well. And John said something to me, and it's a term I've heard before in the stock market, but he said, trees don't grow to the sky. And it reflects back to that, things just don't keep going up and up and up. And right now with commodity prices right now, we're in a bit of an agricultural boom. Probably I've seen 2 or 3 of these in my career, and I've been almost 30 years in agriculture, right? And the takeaway for me was John wasn't saying it because he heard it somewhere. He heard it somewhere, but he's actually experienced this multiple times in his lifetime and in his career, in his role. And I thought, what a great thing to be able to translate back to some of the younger farmers that were on the call that day is, you got to capture, this is a wave. You got to catch that wave, and don't think that there's these big waves just keep coming, because they're not going to come forever. And so, I think when you come back to board recruitment, like we'll get a new generation of younger leaders in agriculture, a lot of different backgrounds. They're going to come and fill these board roles that, a lot of people are longer in generation or career like myself. But it's good to have that blend, because if you have younger people involved, they've got a different perspective. They've got a different education. They've got, from a different generation. You have some people that are very experienced. They've seen some of these things before. They've tackled similar problems. So I truly believe that diversity makes for a better, more comprehensive board or decision-making or team. So I think, Erin, that I've seen it come to life.
I love this example of the COVID task team, because I think you've given everyone an example that's really tangible and relevant. There isn't anyone, I don't think, who wouldn't appreciate the different perspectives or the different situations that people find themselves in through this pandemic. So thank you for that. Let's talk more about the role that diversity will play in the sector's ability to attract talent, to bring new innovative ideas, to help our sector become more competitive. What are the skill sets, in your view, that the workforce of the future has to have? And how are we attracting this talent into Canada's agriculture sector?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Erin. I think that we're in a really exciting time in agriculture right now, particularly when we're looking at attracting talent. But we're going to have to look at how we attract that talent in different ways and what our value proposition is that we are providing to future employees. And right now, I would say one of the biggest things is the digital space. It's impacting so many different areas of agriculture. If you look at research development, marketing, digital farming, social, it kind of just goes on and on. And some of these talents are natives to agriculture, they're involved in agriculture, but some of them are outside of agriculture. Some of the top talents are outside of agriculture. So we are going to have to go find those those talents, and the acceleration of digital. It's I've never seen it at the rate that it's at now, and it's going to just explode over the next few years, and it's going to cause a talent shortage, or we will be looking at taking people that are in digital kind of facets of business, different areas of business, and educating them on agriculture versus doing it the other way around. So for me, that's a big part, a skill set that will be in high demand. The other area is it's a little harder to explain, but it's more around collaborating across boundaries, or the ability to collaborate remotely, different countries, different provinces, different disciplines. We'll have to be able to use, whether it's things like Zoom or remote collaboration mechanisms. The way you set up your business, the way you set up your team, the way people are allowed to engage in the conversation, the ability to be able to lead that, those are going to be skills that are going to be needed, because a lot of technologies, they will be applicable in Canada, US, Brazil, Europe. And if you have the ability to network and collaborate across those boundaries, that will be a skill that's going to be very useful going forward. Also, the other area, I think in agriculture that's going to really lift off over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be the area of sustainability and responsible business. So sustainability right now, when you're talking to people outside of agriculture, particularly younger talents, they want to hear what your sustainability story is. You better be ready, because they're going to ask you. They don't want to work for a company that they don't feel comfortable with, or they don't feel is running a responsible business. They don't just want a good career. They want to feel that they're doing something right for the environment, right for climate change. And so you have to be really willing and ready to answer those sustainability questions and have a great story for your business and also your industry as well. And so crafting those stories, being able to tell them, being able to develop metrics that are meaningful to people, that whole element of sustainability, connecting it back to agriculture and then connecting it back to the value that we have in our industry, that is going to be a key talent going forward that's going to be highly sought after.
I'd never thought about sustainability or looked at sustainability through that lens with respect to our ability as a sector to recruit talent, or the competitive edge that it could give one company over another as it relates to recruitment and your ability to capture that talent. So I appreciate that perspective. I want to talk a bit more about the impact that the pandemic has had specifically on your company. I think about the way in which I used to work. I used to be of the mindset that we needed to be in the office every day as a team. How else could we effectively share ideas or cross-pollinate with our colleagues if we weren't together in the same space? And then a little over a year into my current role, we were all forced to lead our teams remotely. So I feel like this shift has presented leaders with an opportunity to bring our teams back to something better. I don't know yet what that looks like, but I would be curious to know, what can we do in the new workspace, in the new way of working, that's going to find ways to motivate creativity and productivity. And I would be curious to know, what impact has the pandemic had on the hiring practices at Syngenta, for example?
Yeah, I think about this all the time, actually, Erin. And it's a story that's not completely played out yet, right? So, but I think the pandemic is going to have a huge impact on the future of work, like a huge impact. And if you would have asked me 6 months ago or 8 months ago, I would have had a different answer than I have now. So now I feel it's almost like more informed than it was 8 months ago. And this is an area that's quite controversial particularly amongst senior leaders, because they've got a different view of work and maybe been working in a certain way for a longer period of time. One of the things I think that it's going to have an impact on, if you look at flexible work arrangements or flexible work location, we just have a big rollout in Syngenta of both flexible work location and flexible work arrangements, basically mapping jobs and seeing, can this job be done from another location? Part of this is talent, making sure that we've got the best talent. But part of it is also the value proposition back to future workers or our employees. So if I think about knowledge worker roles, for example, not, these are roles that aren't necessarily in the field. They're tied to specific territory or something, but knowledge worker roles that can be done from multiple different locations. I think that flexible work arrangements and flexible work location, they're going to be table stakes going forward if you want to compete for talent in a certain market. So I think what the pandemic did is it pressure tested home-based working. So what we found out is it works. You can work from home in a lot of different roles, and you can be effective in doing that. What it didn't pressure test was hybrid work. So the ability to work from home, but also work in an office or work in a research farm, or have more of a community around you to support you in your job. And I think what we've seen over the pandemic is while we're able to keep going in our roles, we've in general seen a mental health decline. And when I think of the mental health decline that we had, it's actually related most to that sense of community, that personal interaction. So while the pandemic really pressure tested home-based work, I think the future is hybrid work. So it's a blend of both. There was a recent study. If anybody's interested and excited about the future of work like me, there's a recent survey that had some really interesting results that was done by Slack of knowledge workers. And in there, 72% of knowledge workers, they don't want just working from home or working in an office. That's the minority. They actually want it all. They want to have the opportunity to have the flexibility of working at home, the focus time. They want to have the opportunity to collaborate in an office environment or with a community. And I think for me, it's that whole sense of belonging that has been challenged during the pandemic. And for me, I can handle a lot of home-based working, and I'm an introvert. But I can't wait to have that face-to-face collaboration, and it's different for everybody. So if you look at it, if as an organization, if you don't have flexible work arrangements, you don't have an element of flexible location for some of your roles, you don't have some kind of ecosystem that sets up your team for a sense of belonging, other companies are going to do that. And that is going to be the success of the future of work. Who does it successful? Who sets it up? As leaders, we are going to have to let go of a bit of control. Because if you hang on to this thing too tight, you're not going to be able to and start to say, hey, it's how many hours. This is over now, folks. It's how many hours you spend in the office. People are going to go, yeah, but I used to be kind of like outcome based, and when I was at home during the pandemic, and now you're telling me it's based on how many hours I'm into the office. I think workers are going to push back from that, and it's going to differentiate employers going forward.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll have to think and talk more about that as we transition back to this hybrid model, which I think is an excellent model. I In March of this year, I want to get back to the conversation on technology for a moment, because in March of this year, you were interviewed by the Globe and Mail about the role that technology is currently playing on Canadian farms and the impact that it's going to have on the future of our sector. In that piece, you said if we are going to satisfy environmentally conscious consumers and be an economic driver for Canada, agriculture will need to be leaders in digital technology. So I'm curious to know, where is Canada currently leading? What is one area where you think we need to be focused on making improvements? And what, if any, barriers to adoption do you think we face?
Yeah. Okay. Before I get there, I just want to connect back to that sustainability discussion, because I think one of the things that Canada has is we've got consumer confidence, and we're getting credit, I guess. What digital will do in that world around value chain and sustainability is actually we're going to get credit for the great things that we're already doing in Canada. So one of the things that we've got, I think, just starting off, where we are leading is we have a population that has a high level of consumer confidence. If you look at some of the data coming out of the Center for Food Integrity, they're saying we have that consumer confidence. So that's one of the areas that I think we're leading. When I think of this question, I think of the world, and I've been all over I've been in many different countries where agriculture has an impact, but I haven't experienced, the entire world. I don't think many people get to experience that. But one of the things that when I look at answering this, Canada in general is pretty well financed from an agricultural perspective. We have a science-based regulatory system, and I think that it's very important for our industry going forward. Overall, we have a pretty efficient infrastructure now in Canada for getting to market, and we have a really great education system, and we have a very educated population if you look at our farmers and many people in agriculture. The digital revolution in agriculture that I talked about earlier, it's going to happen regardless of whether Canada is on board or whether we're participating. It is an absolute global revolution right now. Every day, particularly if you look at venture capital, you look at private equity, they are looking for that next big thing, and they're looking at agriculture. There's a lens, people focusing all their attention on agriculture. So if there's a startup business, there's a new idea, there's a new technology, it's getting a lot of attention now, and likely will get funded, not just within the country, but it could get funded from beyond country borders. So that's going to happen regardless. And there's a lot of things that we can do as a country or as an industry to try and encourage, those startups or new technology. But it's going to happen, and we will see technologies that are leverageable in other countries also make their way to Canada in kind of a global context. So that's going to happen regardless. What I really worry about is two main areas. It's around the digital infrastructure in Canada, the setup that we've got, because the speed of adoption is going to be very important for our farmers, our growers, and people involved in supporting agriculture. That is going to be a big game changer or a big facilitator. It's either going to push us further ahead or it's going to hold us back, because the technology is going to be there, and we have access to a lot of these other resources that I talked about. The other area is around talent development and making sure as an industry we're developing people in our industry so they can be able to implement a lot of these digital technologies. But for me, I get really worried and skeptical about percentages when we talk about this. And let's just say we'll use a number like 5 years from now, 90% of Canada has broadband. I mean, that would be great if that happened. Chances are that last 10%, it's probably rural, and it's probably going to be a farmer. And in agriculture, you could have large growers or people with operations. They're very important to the local economy. They're very important to agriculture overall, but they could be falling outside that margin to have access to digital infrastructure. So for me, a sure bet from an investment perspective for Canada is to get broad reaching digital infrastructure. All of our farmers should be able to have access to broadband. That is going to take agriculture here, the combination between all those things I talked about earlier and adding on the ability to implement new digital technologies. That's going to take agriculture to the next level, but it could be that thing that potentially holds us back as well.
Thanks, Trevor. This has been a really great conversation, and we've covered a lot of ground. Before we close, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions on a topic where I think you and I have a shared interest, and that is around leadership. We both studied the topic at Royal Roads University, and as I mentioned, that's where you completed your graduate certificate in executive coaching. So let's start with a challenge that many leaders are grappling with right now, and that is leading through times of great uncertainty. What have you learned, either through your coursework at Royal Roads or in the many years that you've been leading teams, that has served you well through this pandemic?
Yeah, I think early on, we were really looking for some type of certainty. When you talk about the pandemic, what could we be certain about? And what we found out is there wasn't a lot that we could be certain about. Things were constantly changing. So you had to be comfortable with a lot of ambiguity. And if you want to reflect on using coaching as an example of something where there's a lot of ambiguity, I think back at one of my final exams that I had that was part of the coaching practicum that you build up to, is people sign up, just in business owners, people in the city, they sign up and they get free coaching. And they have a panel that sits of experienced coaches, sits in the actual room, and they bring somebody in off the street that you never met, and you sit there and you have to start the conversation and find out why are they here. So all you really have is your experience, you have a process, but you have to be okay with knowing that this is very ambiguous, and you have to be comfortable letting go of that. And I think with the COVID, with the pandemic, I think it applies back to that. Early on, we were really struggling because we were trying to get some level of certainty around what was going to happen, managing the timeline. And over time, we started to just think more about, what we need to know what our purpose is. We need to know what our values are. And we can use a process that's got to be agile and flexible, and we have to stay connected and we have to support each other. But we're not going to get to a place where we know everything. That's just not the way it works. So we aligned on our process, and we aligned on our values as a team. And one of the values was keeping Syngenta people safe, keeping our customers, whether they're retailers or farmers, safe, being able to serve them still the way that they needed to be served. And we wanted to make sure that we kept our business continuity together, that was a value as well. And the reason why is because in order for people to do their jobs out in the field and farm, they need products in order to do that. And they could be impacted by pandemic, as we've seen a lot of supply chains impacted. So once we aligned on our values and we were solid on that, you know what your goal is, but you have to be flexible in terms of how you're going to get there, and accepting that early on, just like you are when you have someone walking in off the street that you don't know why they're there to see you. I think for me, that was the connection I put between the question you just asked.
That process sounds very scary, but I think it's probably one which prepared you well for the situation that we've been in for the last year. And what you've said resonates with something we attempted to do too at Grain Growers, and that was, at least initially, when there was a high level of uncertainty, and there may have been personal challenges that everyone was trying to figure out. And you're right, they're different from family to family depending on your circumstances. If you have small children at home who are not in school, the question we had to ask ourselves every week in our Monday morning meetings was, where do Grain Grower members need us to be right now? Because we may not be able to do everything we'd hoped we could accomplish this month, outlined in our work plan, but where do we most need to be right now? So we're laser focused on the top one or two priorities. A colleague of mine, someone we both know, shared a recent article with me from the New York Times, and it was about how many of us right now find ourselves in a state of languishing during this pandemic. And I looked at a post that you put up recently, and you referenced the role that mindfulness and recovery in particular have played in managing personal performance, especially as it relates to the ways in which you've adapted your routine during the pandemic. Tell me a bit about this.
Yeah, I think I'll start with recovery, I guess. Um, I think for me, what that means is it can't be just all stress, 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 no matter what profession you're in. You can't be just, and even if you look at it from an athletics perspective, is a good example. If all you do is work out and you don't rest and you don't eat, you're actually not going to get to where you need to go. And I think that applies back to business. It applies back to farming. You have to take that time to recover. And it struck me partly through the pandemic, and you'll see this if you start to read up about people's sleep patterns during the pandemic and the impact that it's had on sleep, for example, and recovery. Is I was kind of doing the same thing over and over, and I wasn't really taking time to recover or to decompress from a lot of the activities that I was doing. And I got thinking, because I was looking back at my calendar a couple of years ago, and I was on planes all the time. I was going to meetings. I was in Ottawa. I was at a board meeting in Winnipeg, and I remember those sort of that 2-hour trip home. That was a recovery period for me, right? So it was a break from the everyday. You weren't on your cell phone. You weren't, maybe you were doing some emails or something like that. But that was a decompression time for you, so you can regenerate for the next day. I found with working at home, when you talk about languishing, a lot of that is we're forgetting, we're trying to do a lot of the same things. You need to take that break because that's going to power you up and recover for your next day. And it's always about, in any kind of business or career or commitment, it's always about how you perform over the long term versus sometimes you need really great short-term performance. But if you've had great short-term performance and you're not here long-term, then you've kind of defeated the purpose, right? Of having of you being able to contribute to your family business or whatever you're involved in. They need you. So that's for me, recovery. Mindfulness is just another, and they used to call it stress management. But I mean, mindfulness is really used a lot now in sports. It's very common to have a performance coach, in sports. I think everybody has to think about that, and there's different ways of doing it. It might be like playing the guitar or going golfing or whatever. My go-to is Headspace, which is an app. We actually offer that to all employees of Syngenta, and we have pretty high engagement of use of that app across the Canadian business. But for me, it's taking that break and cleaning your mind out from all the worry and stress, because as humans, it's part of the human condition that we can overthink and keep stressing about certain things that are happening. You have to have an opportunity to be able to step away from that in order to be performing at the best level that you can. Mindfulness is one of those things being used in a lot of different industries, like I said, sports as well. And there's some cheap ways of doing that, using an app or reading a book. But a friend of mine who is a farmer said to me, he got his best ideas when he was sitting on a tractor, not sitting at his desk. And it's because he wasn't doing, say, heavy thinking, but he's in the back of his mind, maybe it's there. And then you get that big idea and that chance to sort of decompress. And I talked about mental health and the struggles that we've had, working from home, many people. Agriculture in general is predisposed to having some challenges around mental health. And so I really encourage anybody who's looking for maintenance. I look at like changing the oil, you have to do regular maintenance in order to have something perform. And this is no different. You have to have regular maintenance of yourself and your mental health in order to do your best at your job and perform at your highest.
Thank you. A lot of what you just said has really resonated with me. I think about how much, and the little things that you would take for granted. I think about how much I used to enjoy sitting at the airport, waiting for my flight to leave. Sometimes I wouldn't mind if it was delayed. You get that little extra bit of time to sit working on your presentation in preparation for tomorrow's meeting, but with no interruptions and no distractions. It's focused time. And I agree, a lot of that time provided the space to clear your mind, to think about ways in which you can inspire and inform your work. And a lot of that we're not doing right now because we're reporting to our kitchen tables each and every day and trying to be productive. And it's about how do we create that space and that time to inspire and inform our desk work. You've shared a number of resources today, Trevor. We're going to find a way to get those up on the Grain Growers website so people can tap into some of the reports that you've talked about through Slack and this Headspace app, which I'm curious about. So we'll share some of those resources with our listeners. But thanks very much for joining me today. This has been a fantastic and inspiring conversation, Trevor.
Yeah, my pleasure, Erin. Thanks. This is I love talking about these topics, and I'm really excited. I hope there's something that people picked up from this, but thanks for the time and the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening to the 19th episode of Fireside Chats with Erin. We will be back in 2 weeks' time for our final episode before I take a break over the summer. Be sure to tune in to hear more about our plans to keep you connected to great conversations while you're out spraying or sitting on the dock out at the lake. In the meantime, if you want to stay up to date with all things GGC, please follow us on Twitter at Grain Growers or on Instagram at Canada's Grain Growers. Until then.